Picture this. You're on a dark road in Ohio, which is already a questionable decision because Ohio at night feels like the universe's way of saying, "Are you sure about that?" You're with your friends, all hopped up on teenage adrenaline and gas station snacks, and someone says, "Let's go down Gore Orphanage Road," because apparently the collective IQ of the group drops 40 points the moment someone suggests doing something haunted. You walk. It's quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet where your brain starts narrating your own death like it's a Netflix documentary. Then you hear it, a giggle, a cry, a whisper, a tiny handprint on your car window. Someone swears they saw a shadow dart across the road. Someone else says they smell smoke. And suddenly, everyone is sprinting like the ghost of a Victorian child is chasing them with a butter knife. And the wildest part, the orphanage everyone's terrified of, the one that supposedly burned down with dozens of children inside, never existed. In episode 3, Meet the Host, I talked about a glowing grave in a graveyard in South Attleboro, Massachusetts, my hometown. Welcome to Ohio, the place where I now call home. The place where the ghosts are real, the buildings are imaginary, and the folklore is held together with trauma, gossip, and the chaotic energy of bored teenagers. Welcome back to Caffeine, Chaos, and Cuss Words, the 10th episode. The podcast where I drink too much caffeine, swear too much, and tell you stories that make you question every urban legend you've ever heard at a sleepover. Today, we're diving into one of Ohio's most famous hauntings, Gore Orphanage, a place that is not an orphanage, not named after Gore, and somehow still manages to be haunted as hell. Ohio really said, facts never matter. I'm your host with the most, Sharon. Let's get into it. The classic Gore Orphanage story is practically a rite of passage in northern Ohio. I moved to Northeast Ohio 23 years ago, and trust me, this was one of the first "welcome to the neighborhood, here's your local nightmare legend" I had heard. There was an orphanage. It burned down. All the children died screaming. Their spirits haunt the woods. If you park your car and turn it off, you'll hear them. If you leave your windows fogged, you'll see tiny handprints. If you call out to them, they'll call back. If you're really unlucky, you'll see a shadow figure, a tall one, watching from the tree line. People swear that they've experienced children laughing, children crying, running footsteps, voices whispering their name, the smell of burning wood, the feeling of being watched, a sudden drop in temperature, a sense of dread so heavy it feels like someone's sitting on your chest. Some claim they see a little girl in a white nightgown. Some claim they've heard a boy calling for help. Some claim they saw dozens of small figures moving between the trees. It's the perfect spooky legend, except none of that actually happened the way people think. The truth is way messier, way sadder, and way more complicated. There was an orphanage, the Light of Hope Orphanage, run by Reverend John Sprunger and his wife Katie. And these two, they were the early 1900s version of "we're doing God's work," but with the energy of "absolutely not." Someone call literally any authority. Before the Sprungers ever showed up, this land already had a past, and not a light and cozy one. This is where the Swift Mansion stood. And the Swift Mansion wasn't some rundown shack in the woods. It was a massive Greek revival estate built in the early 1840s by Joseph Swift, a wealthy farmer and a War of 1812 veteran. Locals called this place Rosedale, and for a time it was one of the most impressive homes in the area. But after Swift sold the property in the mid 1800s, tragedy and rumors started piling up. The Wilbur family, who had lived there for decades, were openly involved in spiritualism and held seances in the house, which in rural Ohio was enough to get you labeled as unnatural. Several children in the family later died during a diphtheria epidemic. No, not in the house, but details blur when fear and gossip get involved. By the time the last Wilbur passed away in 1901, the mansion was abandoned, decaying, and already whispered about as a bad place. So when the Sprungers purchased the property just a couple of years later, they weren't starting fresh. They were stepping onto land already soaked in grief, superstition, and uneasy silence. The Sprungers bought the old Swift property, including the abandoned but still standing Swift Mansion and several surrounding farms, in 1903. They set up what they called an orphanage and trade training center. Sounds wholesome, right? Like a Victorian vocational school. Yeah, no. Let's talk about what actually happened inside this place, because the real horror wasn't ghosts, it was adults. According to historical accounts, what they actually ran was more like a child labor operation wearing a thin Jesus flavored disguise. Here's what the allegations included: forced labor disguised as training. Kids aged 7 to 17 were made to work in the Sprungers printing shop and publishing company. Not learn a trade work, full on unpaid labor that kept the business running. They were rented out like farm equipment. Sprunger literally rented the children out to neighboring farms as hired hands. Imagine being an orphan and your caretaker is basically pimping you out to bale hay for strangers. Beatings as punishment. Reports say beatings were common, and not just from the Sprungers. Overseers and even local farmers were allowed to discipline the kids. Neglect and harsh conditions. Multiple accounts describe the children as malnourished, overworked, and living in miserable conditions. Kids ran away constantly, which pretty much tells you everything you need to know. A reputation so bad, the community talked. Local newspapers and residents at the time described the place as a house of misery. And here's the kicker. This is the same couple whose previous orphanage in Indiana burnt down in 1899, killing 3 girls. That tragedy was real. That trauma was real. And when they moved to Ohio and set up shop again, the community never forgot it. And here's the part where everything clicks into place, because this also was happening in Ohio at the exact same time. In 1908, just 5 years after the Sprungers set up shop, a public school burnt to the ground in Collinwood, Ohio, near Cleveland. The Lakeview School fire killed 172 children, along with 2 teachers and a rescuer. Kids trapped inside a burning building, exits blocked, piles of bodies, mass graves, newspapers everywhere filled with images of screaming children and smoke-filled hallways. That fire was real. That trauma was statewide, and Ohio never recovered from it. So now, zoom out and look at the chaos. A couple running an abusive orphanage, kids suffering and disappearing from the radar, a previous orphanage fire in Indiana that had killed 3 girls, a nearby very real school fire that killed over 170 children, and a creepy abandoned mansion on a road literally called Gore Orphanage. The orphanage in Ohio never burned, but the suffering absolutely happened. The fires existed, just not all in the same place. By 1911, John Sprunger is dead. By 1916, the orphanage shuts down and the kids are relocated due to investigation behind the abuse and neglect allegations. And in 1923, years after everything's closed and abandoned, the Swift Mansion actually burns down, empty, silent, and ready to be misunderstood. And suddenly, the legend of a burned orphanage full of screaming children, it doesn't seem so random anymore. The fire never happened in Ohio, but the suffering absolutely did. And that's why the haunting feels real. So, mixing all of that into this chaotic, crazy cake batter. Now, imagine you're a teenager in the 1950s, 1980s, or hell, last week even, and you walk into the woods, you find a burned out stone foundation, you see blackened beams, you see collapsed walls, and a basement that looks like Satan's Airbnb. And someone in your group goes, "Oh, yeah, that's the orphanage that burnt down with all those kids inside." Boom. Instant legend. Swift Mansion didn't just influence the legend, it is the physical backbone of the legend. Without Swift Mansion, the Gore Orphanage legend doesn't exist. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Ohio's most confusing haunting, make sure you follow the show, leave a rating, drop a review, share this episode with someone who loves spooky shit, or send it to that one friend who swears they saw a ghost child on Gore Orphanage Road. Your support keeps this caffeinated chaos alive and helps more people find the show. All right, let's get into the final segment. Even though the orphanage never burned down when it was actively operational as an orphanage, people still report the paranormal experiences I mentioned in the beginning of this episode. And honestly, it makes sense because the land itself is layered with the real suffering at Light of Hope, the real fire that happened in Indiana, the real schoolhouse tragedy that happened nearby, the ruins of the Swift Mansion, the trauma of the Wilbur family that had resided in the Swift Mansion after the Swift sold it, the real fear teenagers bring with them, and the power of a creepy-ass road name. People aren't imagining anything. They're reacting to a place soaked in overlapping grief, rumor, and history. It's folklore alchemy. It's trauma soup. It's Ohio being Ohio. And before we wrap up, if you ever visit the area, do yourself a favor. Take the 40-minute trip to a little place called the Greek Corner Gyros at 4912 Pearl Road, Cleveland, Ohio. Get yourself a gyro. Get two. Tell Tom and the crew I sent you. They may not sponsor this show, but they keep me fed, happy, and treat me like family, which is rare in today's world. And if you ask me, very much needed. Thanks for hanging out with me today on this spooky, chaotic ride through one of Ohio's most tangled legends. Stay caffeinated, stay chaotic, but maybe stay away from abandoned orphanages. This episode is sponsored by Dubby Energy, fueling my chaos one cup at a time. Visit dubby.gg and use my promo code CaffeineCrew for 10% off of your order. This episode was written, narrated, and produced by yours truly. And don't forget to visit our social media pages for case material extras. You can find all of our links at linktree/chaos crew pod. That's linktr.ee/chaos crew pod. Until next time, this has been a Busy House production.